I am Albert Levis, a psychiatrist. My accent is Greek. For the last 60 years, I've been pondering on making psychology into a science, and a science understanding how to integrate the different aspects of psychology into a consistent, cohesive continuum, starting with the body, biology, continuing with psychology, sociology, understanding the thought process, understanding emotions, behaviors, understanding morality, and religions. So in my journey through ideas, I identified a pattern that repeated itself several times in the Greek creation stories. And I identified in the pattern the periodicity of science and reduced the ideas as a phenomenon of energetic transformation, that the mind resolved conflict. It moved from energy as conflict to energy transformed into meaning, morality, social adjustment. And that this was the unconscious as a scientific phenomenon that transforms energy following two scientific mechanisms. One is a pendulum oscillation, and the other one is equilibrial principles. The pendulum is a very simple phenomenon of science, and the issue is recognizing that behavior essentially is a natural science of energetic transformations. This has been the mystery in making psychology and religion into a science, being able to reduce the complexity of behavior into the simplicity of scientific formulas. So the formula of the simple harmonic motion, the pendulum oscillation, is the pendulum out of its balance upon the creation of a conflict as a normative deviation, or we think of norms as a system of power positions and as a system of alternative ways of resolving, relating. And so the pendulum out of its position of rest is capturing suddenly energy as an emotional state. And the mind uses that energy to transform into art, into meaning, into a social adjustment, returning back to the rest state. The mind doesn't like the high psychic tension that is created by conflict. The mind has an automatic homeostatic mechanism of reducing that sense of conflict, that sense of energy. But how does it do that? Three pendulum oscillations guided by an unconscious that has formal operations that are modifying attitude, modifying power, and modifying how a person transforms emotions. So from passivity, we go to activity. From antagonism, we go to cooperation. From alienation, we go to mutual respect. Now, these are scientific equilibrium principles of another phenomenon which we call the trace of a scale. You put a weight, creating a conflict. There are three ways of resolving it: putting a weight on the other tray, removing it, or shifting the weight on the fulcrum. So, creating a new psychology, we are essentially introducing two scientific phenomena and saying that the unconscious is a homeostatic mechanism that resolves conflict. And it resolves it in three pendulum oscillations as a set of 6 emotions, passive-active, 3 times, then antagonism to cooperation, and then alienation to mutual respect. Mutual respect is a key formal operation that resolves conflict. And we need respect to be able to stop having conflict with our system. The unconscious resolving conflict helps humanity to evolve improving conflictual systems like the family. And we can look at the history of religions as discoveries of science, as discoveries of how the world improved the family institution by moving from intense conflict, as in matriarchy, which was extremely polarizing, asking life sacrifices. It was the eagle and the snake. In the Aztec culture, it was Medusa, and the Greek culture, and how the culture discovered how to undo that intensity of family conflicts. And so religions evolve as discoveries of conflict resolution, and they evolve the family system from intense conflict in patriarchy to less intense conflict in patriarchy, with Zeus being a very dominant type of male figure. Then you have the discovery of cooperation, moving from antagonism to cooperation in India, where we have asceticism, and we have Buddhism, where a man doesn't want to have power, he wants to simply breathe deep and suffer in this in a second or third reincarnation. And so religions evolved discovering science, and the biggest discovery was mutual respect between father and son in the Jewish monotheistic religion. And religion discovered really science, and if you think God is the principle of science, oneness, the religions discovered science as monotheism, as one cause. They discovered the process as in Genesis, the 6 emotions being the 6 days of creation leading us to Sabbath, the day of rest. Religions discovered the operations, the formal operations as choices of moving from passivity to activity to moderation, from antagonism to cooperation, from alienation to respect. And this is what the 10 Commandments are about. So what I would like to share with you is that we have finally been able to reduce the multiplicity of stories into understanding the plot of stories as a scientific phenomenon, that we have been able to identify the secrets of happily ever after as the scientific structure of the creative process. So the creative process becomes a phenomenon that we can all appreciate, can all agree about, that we can all examine in our creativity to find how the mind resolves conflict, and also to find about ourselves how we resolve conflict. And so in the scientific analysis of the creative process, we have to recognize 2 aspects of the unconscious. One is the energetic aspect. The 3 pendulum oscillations are energetic transformations. And the second is the 4 alternative ways of resolving conflict, the 4 modalities. And we have a very nice sculpture of that as waves on the one side, and as 4 cycles, 4 spirals, showing how they have different ways of resolving conflict. And that has really the form of a sperm. A sperm has a tail that is propelling it, that's energy, and it has a head that has a direction. The mind has a heartbeat and a moral compass. And this is our challenge now, to introduce and get people familiar with both the physics of the simple harmonic motion as a set of emotions, as a syndrome, and understand the 4 modalities as 4 wellness diagnoses, and understand how we can utilize creativity to develop a new psychology. The first segment was an introduction to the formal theory, and every segment will be followed by some slides so that you can enhance the concepts with something visual and recognize the concepts illustrated with images. So in the first section, we talked about science being introduced into the methodology of psychology of the unconscious. And there are 2 phenomena of science that help us to understand how the unconscious basically is an energetic phenomenon that is transforming conflict to resolution as an upgrading of the quality of energy. So there are two phenomena that I mentioned about combined in the unconscious. One is the pendulum oscillation. And here you see the issue of the displacement of the pendulum as displacement and forces taking the pendulum back. This is the formula of energy. Energy equals the product of the displacement times the force of acceleration. Now, this is three oscillations of the pendulum that complete unconsciously the transformation of conflict to resolution. We arrived to this six-role process by studying a pattern that is repeated in Greek mythology. And so this is here the pattern that I observed: stress, response, anxiety, defense, reversal, compromise, and the end of the cosmogony stories is the creation of a religion. So we have the validation of the concept of the energetic transformation, in the sense that the atrocious relationship between father and son in the Greek mythology culminate with a religion. This is also presented in the six roles: stress as a child regarded as a potential murderer, or response, the child murdering his oppressive parent with the help of the mother, the child anticipating to be murdered by his own children. So defensively, the parent murders his own children, and eventually, with the help of his wife, the children rebel, and the person is murdered by one's children. And the compromise is the cursing of the children by the father to be murdered in their turn. So this is not a complete conflict resolution, but ideally a conflict resolution moves us from passivity, antagonism, alienation, to activity, cooperation, and mutual respect. These are the three formal operations. Now, let's take a look at these operations. These are the equilibrial principles of a scale. So identity is represented as placing a weight on the trays, and the equilibrium is restored either by placing reciprocally a weight on the opposite scale, or by removing the original weight, or through correlation, which is shifting weight on the fulcrum. These correspond to transforming passivity to activity, antagonism to cooperation, and alienation to mutual respect. We can graphically present the six-role process as we saw with a sine curve, and we can present here the formal operations as the alternatives of power, powerlessness, and cooperation versus antagonism. Antagonism is counterclockwise, cooperation is clockwise vectors. And the emotions are interrelated. Aggression is provoking paranoia. Assertion is eliciting feelings of considerateness to the counterpart. Concessions elicit hope, versus oppression elicits hostility. Now, we have here alternative ways of resolving conflict, and these are illustrated in this image of how four cultures resolve the conflict of temptation in a very different way. So here is the Judaic injunction of the apple being forbidden, and that presents the assertive, cooperative way of relating. On the other side, the Greek paradigm is about the apple being inscribed to the fairest, creating competition among the beautiful women who are bribing Paris as the judge. And this is leading to a huge conflict of Paris eloping with a married woman, Helen of Troy, which is leading to the major conflict of the Trojan War. Now, these are the dominant cultures where the apple is desirable and the different ways of dealing with it, cooperative versus antagonistic. These are the submissive cultures, and the Aztec culture recognizes the submissive antagonistic position of the person, with the apple being the person's heart, which is extracted from the person on top of the pyramid. This is a submissive antagonistic position, and the person is resigned to this kind of torture. And the other side, in the Hindu culture, the apple is the sacred cow that nobody can milk or slaughter. And instead of aggression, the people are actually seeking pain in order to avert being reborn in a life that is full of pain. So here you have the graphic representation of the normative system with vectors that present the antagonistic way of resolving in the Greek model, the Judaic and the cooperative model, in the cooperative to submission in the ascetic, and the antagonistic to submission, which is the Aztec. Now, this kind of conceptualization leads to having a new psychology, which has the focus here on understanding the unconscious as a physical phenomenon, understanding different ways of resolving conflict in the cultures that we saw above, the Aztecs versus the Greeks, the Indians versus the monotheistic. And here we have an assessment which is using creativity for self-discovery. And in this slide, we see the moral science integrating religions as the complement of 4 relational modalities. So the Aztecs introduced a different concept of family relations than the Greeks, the Indians, and the monotheistic religions. And this is a game that the developers, it's called Moral Monopoly, utilizing the deck of cards as the template of the unconscious, presenting here how families resolve conflict differently in different cultures, but how the families have evolved, like in the game, from the spade, which is an upside down black heart, to the red heart, which is upright. And that is like the cycle of evolution. And this is a cycle that also we see materializing in therapy as the person is evolving through different phases of relating. So this is my introduction to the science of behavior. Continuing the presentation of the new psychology, which I call moral science, I would like to clarify that we are making a contribution in the area of diagnosis. Current psychology has given up psychodynamic understanding of behavior. They're not preoccupied with the unconscious. The psychiatric organization has devised a DSM-5 version of Diagnostic Statistical Manual, and so these consist of clusters of symptoms that are useful in getting to classify behavior. I disagree with that perspective. That is useless for most cases to have medical diagnosis, because we are preoccupied with wellness. Everybody deserves to have insight in his behavior. And these diagnoses are not helping a person to learn about himself, to learn about how to improve oneself, how to deal with pathology. Pathology is really the intensification of the alternative ways of resolving conflict. So we have to clarify that we have 4 diagnostic categories, and there are the 2 variables for them is power and attitude. Power is the distinction between dominance and subordinacy. Attitude is the distinction between cooperation and antagonism. So we have 4 diagnostic modalities of wellness. We have the 4 distinctions that it's very important to understand them, as they are totally different syndromes of emotional sequences. And emotions are determined by behaviors, by actions. And it's very important to learn about the system of 6 emotions as a chain reaction, and learning that if we have different symptoms, these symptoms can be controlled deliberately by changing our power, disposition, and our attitude. And so we have to recognize the 4 syndromes, and I have a sculpture display that shows the creative process consisting of waves of, like the tail of the sperm, and heads as 4 spirals. And this is the yardstick, this is the measuring rod that gives organization and names to different parts of a system. So in the system, we can see the difference between dominance and submissiveness. For instance, in the characters of the Wizard of Oz, which are very meaningful and we're all familiar with, we have 2 dominant characters, Dorothy and the lion. One is cooperative and the other one is antagonistic. And we instantly have insight about being a lion. A lion is the state of an angry person, a dominant person experiencing anxiety. He is a coward. More you are a lion, more you're scared. And so this is the sequencing of connecting emotions together as a sequence that moves from stress to response, creates, if your response is dominance or aggression, you're experiencing anxiety, you're becoming defensive. By being defensive, you're creating rivalries and reversals, and then you have a compromise. So we have 2 dominant cases with 2 alternative ways of resolving conflict, Dorothy and the lion. We also have 2 submissive ones, the Tin Man and the Scarecrow. The Tin Man doesn't have a heart, he's hostile, he's submissive, antagonistic. The Scarecrow doesn't have courage in his ideas, he doesn't trust himself, he's submissive, cooperative. So here we have an interesting definition of the spirals that we also have symbolically presented in the game of cards. The game of cards has a lot of insight in terms of having the signs of the spade, which is a black heart upside down and being poked. And the game evolves from the submissive, antagonistic position of the spade to the dominant antagonistic of the club, to then the cooperative submissive of the diamond and the dominant cooperative of the heart. So you have here in the game of cards metaphorical presented the 4 modalities. And also in the game we have the 4 types of family systems, king, queen, jack, and the 10 cards presenting a family constellation, discovering how to resolve conflict in different ways. So diagnosis is now a question of being able to clarify the connection of emotions, the connection from stress to response, varying from modality to modality, and recognizing that emotions are affected by behaviors. And then we have pathology of too much dominance or too much submissiveness. Too much submissiveness doesn't allow a person to feel good about oneself. Either he's hostile or he's depressed. Dominance brings about anxiety, phobia if you're dominant antagonistic, and it brings escalation of conflict if you're dominant cooperative. So we're evolving a new psychology that has a yardstick, and it gives dimensions to wellness behaviors. And from here we can look at what we can do to reduce pathology by using creativity for self-discovery.
Cut.
We have an unconscious that is totally natural science phenomenon, and it is combining an energetic phenomenon with 6 roles, which is a syndrome, a sequence of events, a sequence of emotions. It is a chain reaction that emotions and behaviors are connected tightly within the system of resolving a conflict. This leads, following the distinctions of the 3 formal operations, to the wellness diagnosis as relational modalities, 4 relational modalities, instead of having the medical diagnosis of DSM with classes of clinical symptoms. We identify the process as relational modalities, syndromal wellness diagnostic categories. There are 2 relational principles leading to 4 alternative ways of resolving conflict. The 4 syndromal personality types are well identified with the alternative relational images of the Gorsky retrospective. And we see here the submissive antagonistic with the mouth being obstructed, the dominant antagonistic with the mouth screaming. We see the submissive cooperative with the mouth of God, loving Adam. And here we see the dominant cooperative with the mouth of the artist and the eye of the artist in the center of halos and cross. So we have a number of different ways of illustrating that. The 4 characters of the Wizard of Oz, the 4 youths of the Haggadah, Schultz's Peanuts that we're very familiar with, and the 4 suits of playing the game of cards. Here we have a poor image of the 4 characters of the Wizard of Oz. Here we have the 4 suits of the card game as 4 relational modalities. Red are cooperative, black are antagonistic, left column is submissive, right column is dominant. Now, this is how we can utilize these categories of the syndrome and the relational modalities, developing a psychological assessment, which is the conflict analysis battery. And this is now the time for the next segment. I'd like to share with you at this point the use of creativity for self-discovery. I started by observing a pattern that repeated in the Greek mythology that evolved from terrible family domestic conflicts, a father killing a child with the help of the mother killing a father, to developing a distant religion that created one of the greatest cultures in the history of human thought, the Greek religion of the Olympic gods. I developed the theory by understanding the physics behind that phenomenon as being energetic transformations from conflict to resolution following 2 phenomena of science, the pendulum oscillation and the equilibrium principles of a scale. Now, to illustrate that, I collected a lot of paintings, and what you're seeing behind me is from the collection of Henry Gorsky's retrospective, in which I enjoyed learning about psychology by looking at his canvases evolving in time as periods of conflict resolution. The mouth is missing in something, the mouth emerges in a loving way, the mouth becomes eventually problematic, involving sexuality, guilt, and conflict resolution, and discovering crucifixions, spirituality, religion. So in a way, presenting both the dialectic of emotions in his paintings and also presenting the moral outcome. Now, the value of the theory is in its practical applications. And the practical applications are fantastic in the sense that we can learn about ourselves simply by using creativity for self-discovery, doing our artwork in a structured way, reconstructing the 6 emotions with a number of exercises, like being able to capture the stress with conflictual memories, being able to capture the response with a mask, being able to see anxiety with what is the hidden feelings behind the mask, being able to understand the defense with a dialogue between 2 animals or 2 fairy tale heroes, being able to see a reversal, the loss of control, as an intensified animal metaphor or a dream, and finally seeing the conflict resolution as a story, as a short story that taps the preconscious rather than the unconscious by avoiding to do artwork and doing it after the completion of the story. So this was one of the psychological exercises which we call projective, but organized in such a way that the point of the theoretical analysis is based on reconstructing the dynamics of the conflict resolution process as the 6 emotions that predictably move from a conflict in a person's life to its resolution, and creating some questions on the way, as starting with art and seeing the conflicts in the art and seeing the processing of identifying with the animals and seeing the animals' conflicts and projectively saying what changes should the animals make, and then eventually identifying oneself with one of the 2 animals and the counterpart with somebody else, and recognizing this as a pattern that is repeated in personal life and unfolding, exemplifying a person's way of resolving conflict, and also giving an opportunity to the person to see what changes he has to make to improve his life. And that is a process, a dialectic processing of the projective testing that leads to a person to see what is his pattern that he repeats and what changes he has to make to resolve conflict. And the second instrument in this psychological battery, which I call conflict analysis battery, is understanding the relation and modality diagnosis as a wellness diagnosis. And here we have questions identifying the relational choices according to dominance, cooperative and antagonistic, and subordinacy, cooperative and antagonistic, and psychic tension. Psychology has had 5-factor statistical analysis, but the way psychologists are looking at these are not relational modalities, but traits, unrelated to each other. The only way you remember the psychological battery is by the initial of these traits, like ocean, like disc, and the Myers-Briggs also gives you 16 letters, but you don't really understand yourself from the letters. Now, what we have in our inventory, you learn quickly if you're dominant or submissive, cooperative or antagonistic, and you also identify how well you are or how much illness you have by the identification of the symptoms of psychic tension. So we have here the application of the theory and its validation by showing how useful it is in a short period of time, a person identifying his wellness diagnosis, identifying his syndrome, being able to see the pattern, and without any assistance, discovering how to improve oneself, how emotionally to grow, how to moderate one's dominance and suspiciousness or paranoia, and becoming more tolerant and respectful of others, or the opposite, becoming more assertive, being able to talk about one's feelings, not being so self-conscious and afraid to identify wellness in oneself. So we have a program that is didactic because you learn about psychology, diagnostic because you learn about yourself, and therapeutic in terms of being a healing mechanism. This is very important to develop a program, a concise program of emotional education that, as a matter of fact, is online, it is free, and it is available, and you can use that on your own, or you can bring it into your therapy and accelerate the process of therapeutic outcome and understanding what changes you need to make. Because today you go to therapy and you have cognitive behavioral therapy, which helps you to look at your emotions as symptoms that you learn how to control, rather than understand how the symptoms are in a chain reaction with behaviors that you have to change in order to reduce the symptoms. We have therefore been able to use the battery as an instrument that is evaluation as well as repeated being therapeutic. And it is online, and the online report identifies the relational modality, a table of 7 measurable outcomes of this online testing. So the first is the relational modality diagnosis. The second is looking at the artwork representing the 6-role process with images that are meaningful. Then we have insights organized, what you're learning about your pattern. 4, a list of your suggestions for self-improvement. 5, you're talking about the relevance of that experience for you as an emotional growth experience. 6 is a query which asks you to identify how helpful the testing was to you in terms of finding about yourself, in terms of finding about psychology, in terms of that being an educational or therapeutic program. And finally, you get a transcript of the whole experience as a record for yourself that you can bring to your therapist and to your teacher and discuss your issues of conflict and your need for further resolution. Thank you. I'd like to share with you what I learned from observing the art of an artist by the name Henry Gorsky. And I saw in his art his emotional development through different crises in his life. And you show behind me several paintings that have no mouths. That is part of the symbolic system by Gorsky. And here you see how you get the art that spontaneously was created by the artist becoming object of a scientific analysis. The formal analysis of his canvases integrates them in several sequences of 6 phases: the stress, response, anxiety, defense, reversal, compromise. And then we have the possibility of examining the relational operations manifested in his artwork. So you see the mouth that is obstructed is related to the mouth that is screaming as passivity to activity. The mouth that is obstructed is related to the mouth of the artist with the halus and the crucifix as transformation from alienation to mutual respect. That means normative acceptance, feeling comfortable suffering in the moral paradigm, the normative system of Christianity. Then we have the other formal operation, antagonism to cooperation. Instead of feeling unloved and oppressed by the fingerprint that is obstructing his mouth, here the mouth of God is kissing Adam underneath. So here we have an artist's spontaneous creativity, integrating art dialectically as a sequence, as a syndrome, as well as his relational alternatives. And we can see which is the phase in his life. And you have seen behind myself in the first segments, the canvases that have no mouths. Here you see what happened to him when the mouth broke through the gag as a stress. He had needs, emotional needs, that created this powerful mouth that wants to kiss as a response. Anxiety is the sense of the girl is forbidden, and defense is the violation of a certain norm, which is presented here as the rape of the rose. The consequence to that kind of behavior is the reversal, nowhere to hide, and eventually a kind of a compromised behavior, which is being crucified. And you see his own self identifying with morality as the person is admitting pain and modesty and humility. And that is the price for having a mouth. So that's why the artist was much safer not kissing and getting out of trouble. Now, the conclusion from this presentation is that art can present the personal story, the evolution of the person's feelings, as well as the modality. Now, this is my personal sequence of tests exemplifying the capturing of the syndrome of stress response, anxiety, defense, reversal, compromise, and showing how different tests pick the emotions, like conflictual memory from childhood. This is my childhood experience in the Second World War during the Holocaust. Response is my identity in the mask of Pinocchio, running to avoid the killer whale of metaphors. I had to change my name, and I was called Nicholas Theologopoulos, therefore I felt I was lying as a 6-year-old. Anxiety is what is behind the mask of Pinocchio. And here is Pinocchio saying to Geppetto inside the killer whale, I know the answer to how to be a real child or being a puppet. It's in the conflict resolution. And here is my defense as rethinking the Oedipal relationship with the Sphinx, protesting at Freud's recognition that everybody has Oedipal strivings, which is creating conflict, by showing that our Oedipus is resolving conflicts. And in the Greek tragedy, he's being punished. Here he's offering a branch of olive tree to the Sphinx. And he says, let us be partners. I know the answer to the riddle, but I don't want you to jump off the cliff. Now, this is my dream as my role reversal, the family welcoming guests at the Wilburton Inn for an educational vacation. And this is my compromise, a story of resolving the conflicts of my childhood, of the war of metaphors, by seeing the metaphors of the world as a halo, embracing a fiddler on the roof. The fiddler is my Judaic values, and the roof is the Greek temple presenting science. So you see the validation of the concept of conflict resolution with a set of emotions. Now here you have a number of images of people's animal metaphors. These are people who are submissive. And you see the different presentations of the people who have a submissive personality reflected in the metaphors. I identify with the caribou. His world exploits his weaknesses. He is naive and bewildered. As a young man, I was behind the herd of my peers in areas of self-esteem and self-confidence, as well as sexual sophistication. This is the caribou that stays behind the herd, and it's going to be at the mercy of the wolf. Identify with the dog. All he needs to do is to learn to live the life he has been given. He's never going to be a tiger. This is simply just scenario between me and the strong people in my life. I want to fly away from my problems, but I can't. I feel I can't help myself. I feel like my problems will not go away, leaving me helpless to defend myself from those who don't accept me. This is a bird with a broken wing in front of a wolf that is about to devour it. This is another very interesting presentation of lack of communications. Both animals are turning backs against each other and the world. I am bored, lonely, since husband started working in the city when under pressure of feeling sorry for myself, I plan on overeating and drinking as a reward. Another test that we're using is the mask. The mask is a defense. And here you see the variety of images at the front mask and what is behind the mask and what is a person's heart. These are all submissive people. This is an interesting image. The perpetual smile, false happiness, self-deceit, mockery, shutting out sadness with a smile, and then underneath the mask, blackout, dejection or rejection, unwillingness, and inability to express feelings and being preoccupied with eating, the black hole. And in her heart, there is a mouth that's holding the good feelings on the surface with the bad feelings underneath. This is an interesting case study with long-term therapy, where you see the issues of a submissive person recognizing the problem of communicating feelings and working on that. So these are traumatized people, and you can see the wall here with a crack presenting the image of an abused young girl and how her feelings are completely unrevealed. Now, an alternative set of images represent the dominant people. And here you see two lions fighting for an antelope. This is a young woman who is interested to get married, and she's a butterfly versus being an elephant. I can move like the elephant in terms of analyzing feelings and emotions and understanding how one needs to deal with responsibilities. You can't just keep on flying. So here you see different images presenting dominance in their animal metaphors. I'm the Cheshire cat. I used to be the happiest cat I know. I really wish I could disappear from my current situation, or at least use my climbing ability to climb out of the pit I'm in. I want my ear-to-ear smile back. This was a Cheshire cat. Now, these are the masks and what these masks cover. And it's kind of interesting with dominant people to see the prevalence of lions. And this is a double lion picture behind the Phoenix the cat. You have Phoenix the mad cat and the heart in chains. This is the young woman who has a mask of infinity, and inside she's sad and she's protecting her heart in many layers from being broken. Now, in the use of the conflict analysis battery, we have two tests. One is the metaphors and the other one is the relational modality. Now, you can see how clearly this is a judge whose mask reveals that he has, under the mask, he is a lamb. That is a sign of submissiveness. And you can see the scales of the relational modality. This is the dominant scales. It's all -3 in the dominant cooperative and the dominant antagonistic. And it is all +3 in the submissive cooperative, the submissive antagonistic, and the resignation without hostility. So here, these are submissive antagonistic and submissive cooperative, very elevated. And the profile on the other side of the psychic tension is rather low, except a couple of items. So here you have the importance of the diagnostic of relational modalities. This is a man who is submissive, and his problems were being taken advantage of by a very dominant wife. Now, this is another relational modality profile, which came from a woman who was committing suicide periodically, who was in therapy for 4 years. And she came to visit with me, and she had a very quick recovery because I address the problem as a relational one rather than as a medical. And you can see how clearly she's submissive cooperative, submissive antagonistic, and this is her problem, and also elevation of the psychic tension in certain areas, while she's negative on dominance, cooperative and antagonistic. I'm going into more depth with this case study to show how her metaphors evolved and how she recovered very fast. These are figures contrasting her emotional responses upon the end of the first two sessions, examining 4 topics: how she felt in therapy before in the cognitive model, same behaviors, no resolution, may begin to resolve issues. How she felt about herself as a suicidal person before, off the edge, still perilous but somewhat grounded, and now she's standing on a box. How she felt towards her mother before, overpowering, now she says may be able to stand up to her with help. And then about the future, she could only see her tombstone. Now she could see herself back to being a teacher with a guitar, teaching kids. In her second session, the progress is made is moving from intellectual learning to learning I'm a big baby, about herself, average loser, to becoming an insignificant blob, and relationship with mother being friction here, but being able to distance herself. Now this, you must understand, is a significant reflection of improvement in only 2 sessions. Now this is the battery at the beginning of her therapy, which shows the stress of losing her loving mother. Mask is a bag over her head, anxiety, a list of traumas and negative feelings, followed by an empty heart, defense, the open mouth of a wolf, despises a helpless, worthless bird with a broken wing, reversal, and dreaming of teaching again, compromise. There's a sun and a troll, and afraid of light, burning with flames over his head. Now, this is the second book she created, and I do not want to go through all the details, but she had cathartic releases from traumas in her childhood, like the death of her aunt. She has a mask that has evolved, and behind the mask you see sunshine, you see hearts. Her animal metaphor shows a turtle rather than a bird with a broken wing. The reversal is mourning the loss of her first husband, and the compromise is evolving from being a troll burning at the side of the sun to now becoming the moon. In detail, here is the first presentation of a balloon portrait of the family, and she sees the broken balloon underneath the umbrella of her father. This is the second workbook presenting herself up in the air in the shape of her father. The parents were divorced. This shows the initial identity in the animal family portrait as a mouse or as a snake in her marital family. The conflictual memories were a serious sense of loss and guilt. The mask evolved from the first, which is a bag over your head, to a smiling one with eyes and an open mouth. What is underneath the mask evolved with sunshine, with feelings that are more clear. And here you see the evolution for animal metaphors and the evolution of dreams. And this is the end with a short story, shows the transformation. So this is a therapy that has a totally different approach to working with a patient. It is not such an intense interaction with the patient. It is a patient learning by analyzing her own metaphors, her feelings, and also diagnosis based on relational modalities. So now we're ready for the next segment. The major problem of our world today is that we have a psychology that is agnostic, medicalized, that does not understand morality and does not understand religion. The problem is that we have religions that are self-righteous, that also do not understand where morality has come from other than attributing it to revelation. There are arbitrary moral paradigms that have evolved in the course of history without a continuity of insight about the growth. And so here we have an opportunity to try to understand psychology as a science and understand morality as a psychological phenomenon. The unconscious, we have demonstrated, is a conflict resolution phenomenon that leads to alternative ways of resolving. And that we have a need to improve our resolutions, and that the alternative ways of resolving are more or less effective. But there is a progression, as we pointed out in the deck of cards, from the spade, which is a black upside down heart that is poked, to the red heart, the sign of the deck of cards, which is a red heart upright. And we can see the symbolic significance of these signs of the deck of cards as presenting an evolution of improvement. The intuitive discovery of these symbolic items of the deck of cards is very meaningful, and it can reflect a growth cycle, a self-improvement cycle. It has its manifestations in the individual's life as well as in the evolution of civilizations. So I have developed a game which I call Moral Monopoly, presenting religions as discoveries of how to improve the family, evolving from the spade to the club, from matriarchy to patriarchy, from matriarchy in the Aztec culture, patriarchy in Greek culture, then evolving to the diamond and the heart as the evolution of the Indian culture and Buddhist religion, going to the monotheistic religion and the messianic religions as the improved way of resolving problems in the family. The game allows to retrace the history by identifying stories evolving in each culture, improving conflict. Like mythology is presenting a conflict, and history is another set of cards, another family, which resolves the conflicts in the family. For instance, in the Aztec family, the original conflict was between an eagle and a snake, and that was very intense conflict. In the second story, the historical story, we have the development of a paradigm shift of the cruel mother becoming a good mother, and also symbolically of the fusion of the two animals in the feathered serpent. So you have the feathers of the eagle being attached to the snake. This is a very interesting symbolic evolution in a cultural belief system. So you have the mythology and the history bound together for the player of this game as two stories that the person can analyze and see that still is a culture that has a submissive antagonistic twist in evolving conflict resolution. The person has to be sacrificed and accept that life is ephemeral, and that one has to be extremely afraid in his daily interactions because death is imminent. In the Greek version of conflict resolution, we have the story of Prometheus, who stole the fire of the gods to give it to the mortals, and we have Odysseus, and both of them are dealing with the issue of resolving conflicts with powerful women. And Prometheus was punished by Zeus placed on a rock where an eagle was coming to eat his liver every night. And he freed himself from there by foretelling to Zeus that he was going to be killed by his children. And so Zeus swallowed his wife, and out of his head came Athena, where it shows the struggle of a man and a woman and a compromise in terms of having a child that is born out of a man and that is the new generation of the divine, a compromise. And so, again, Prometheus is evolving now to, from mythology, to a historical story of Odysseus, who is struggling with women on the way to Ithaca and has difficulty extricating himself from the sirens and from the different powerful matriarchal women on his way. So you see the evolution of the Greek mythology and the Greek history being a man struggling with a woman, and eventually you have Agamemnon, who is killed by his wife at the end of the Iliad, the Trojan War, and you have children killing a mother, putting an end to matriarchy, the Electra and Orestes killing Clytemnestra. And on the other side you have Odysseus, who is ending his Odyssey, coming home and finding a wife who has been loyal, who is the ideal type of wife in the Western culture. Penelope is a woman who is very transformed from being a matriarch. So the idea of morality is something that we have to study in the classroom, studying creativity and studying the creative stories of cultures, to learn the cultures have dimensions, they have measurable dimensions, they have power and attitude, choices, and how power and attitude have evolved from passivity to activity, from antagonism to cooperation, and from alienation to mutual respect. The Judaic culture is the most progressive one, but it has not finished the family evolution business. And I have a big sculpture that presents the three patriarchs on thrones, towering above the four matriarchs, were diminutive sculptures, and the two concubines as big birds, chorus birds. And this is unfortunately reflecting the reality of the unfinished business of religions today. And today we have a number of religions that are very different from each other in their choices without recognizing the differences. And the three patriarchs, the three prophets, are representing three kinds of choices of resolving conflict. Jesus is very different from Moses and from Muhammad. And all of these are great leaders who inspire great civilizations, but they have tremendous amount of differences, and that people have to become more aware of both the limitations and pathologies of each culture. And we have today the failure of Catholicism in the sense that you have a massive international phenomenon of pederasty among the clergy because they are deprived of normal sexuality, and we have tremendous amount of political violence among the sects of Islam, and you have the arbitrary use of aggression to protect the faith and to vindicate any kind of insult to the prophet. And you have, in Judaism, you have tremendous amount of obsession with tradition, which also creates conflicts in its adjustment in a new country of recapturing the old promised land. So, in conclusion, what I'm presenting is a new psychology, which I call moral science, because it is based on understanding motivation as the wish, the drive, the key drive of resolving conflict, that rehabilitates the unconscious from the Freudian concept of a conflict seeking, creating unconscious that is defined by Oedipus, generalized to everybody. This is a misdiagnosis of Oedipus, who was a hero of the Greek culture, who was making a big mistake and he was punished. So the Greek drama is really a healing experience for the Greek culture, which has experience the difficulties of evolving roles for the children who are caught between mother and father, and the problem of Oedipus is being a cultural resolution of conflict in one phase of the Greek culture. And in order to understand the Greek culture, we have to see how Greece discovered tragedies, drama, and in the drama, Aristotle identified the perfect universe, the Aetolian holon, which has a beginning, hubris, and an end, which is decay, justice, morality, where the Romans introduced moral power as Deus ex machina, coming on the stage to give the decision about the verdict for the hero. And so we're introducing into psychology morality as the driving motivation, the key motivation that shapes our thinking, and we're developing a clarity on the unconscious as a natural science phenomenon. We develop clarity on diagnostic categories of wellness. We're developing an assessment which is based on creativity for self-discovery, and we're learning about religions as the alternative ways of resolving conflict that are integrated and that are able to address the unresolved conflicts of religions towards making them as partial and complementary discoveries of science integrated by the science. So the end result is we want to place morality as the center of our existences. We want to understand morality as having the principles of moderation, cooperation, and mutual respect as the key moral values, being scientific principles and not based on dogma. And we would like to see that the world demystifies religion so that it doesn't create, they do not create conflict, but they create respect for the particular cultural notions that are beautiful, that are helpful, that have created a lot of historical developments, no matter what the culture, no matter what the religions, the cultures have left us with intense creative experiences. So this is my contribution to making this a better world, because I was responding to the Holocaust as a child. As a child, I experienced the decimation of a whole group of kind people on the basis of religious differences. And I had to puzzle things through to understand why the world is so confused about ideologies, about religions, and developing a method that safely guides us beyond conflict into resolution. Thank you. I have enjoyed in trying to make sense of behavior, understanding morality, and understanding religions as based on the unconscious need to resolve conflict, and seeing the beauty of continuity, of refinements, of conflict resolution in the history of civilization, as how religions evolved, restructuring family relations, improving the family, but yet without completing their mission for peace in the world, for conflict resolution. And we know how much trouble really religions are creating through sectarian conflicts, through cross-cultural conflicts. Now, everybody loves the Bible, and the Bible is the most sophisticated document for improving family relations. And here I have captured in a sculpture by Judith Brown that once upon a time was at the Lincoln Center as presenting the Abrahamic family. And you see the three big figures as the Abu Simbel type of concept, sitting on big thrones, while the diminutive figures of women, four of them, represent in my mind the four matriarchs. There are also two huge birds, Horus birds, the symbolic significance of Horus, but I present them as the concubines, as the additional wives. And the significance of this sculpture for me is recognizing the politics of the family as casting women as a different type of power position in the family and in civilization. And the Abrahamic family, the Abrahamic religions have continued this kind of discrimination between the genders, more serious in Islam and Catholicism, and also in traditional Judaism. But the world is evolving, and civil rights allowing women to claim power, to claim political power. But the thing that is holding us back is the arbitrariness of the moral paradigms that are frozen in time. And I'm giving credit to Abraham and to Sarah for being able to create a good family. And here I have the altar for the sacrifice of Isaac. And the significance of that in my mind is a test of love, a test of loyalty that Abraham inflicted on his two wives. He had two children, Hagar and Sarah, and he wanted to see which of them is totally selfless and being able to let him sacrifice a child. So in my interpretation of what happened, I'm saying that Abraham asked his two wives to let him sacrifice a child because God asked him to do so. And he asked them, which one is willing to let him sacrifice her child? And in my response, I see Sarah saying to Isaac, carry the wood. And I see Abraham testing out both Isaac and his wife. The outcome of this was that Sarah passed away while he was testing out his son for the sacrifice. But the goat came to solve the problems of the sacrifice. So the religions evolved, improving the family. And there is a great improvement in this family from the Aztec family, from the from the Greek family, and to some extent from the Indian family. So my next challenge was to develop an analysis of religions as evolution, as moral monopolies, and piecing together a historical evolution by using a deck of cards. So this is the template of the unconscious, utilizing the deck of cards with the figures of the signs, presenting the symbolism of the deck as reflecting evolution from antagonism to cooperation, from the upside down heart that is being poked as submissive antagonism to the upright heart, which is red and which corresponds to good feelings of love in a relationship. So in the symbolic presentation of its culture, I'm presenting a phase of mythology that is illustrating the conflicts evolving and being resolved in the culture. So here you have the eagle and the snake evolving as a feathered serpent in the historical culture. In the Greek culture, you have the matriarchal sphinx, who is evolving to the beautiful virginal Athena. In the submissive cooperative Hindu culture, I see the yin yang evolving to the Buddhist concept of less austere passage to enlightenment. In the Christian and in the Judaic and Christian evolution, I see the Abrahamic family presented with its divisions, and I see the Messianic family as the shift from the father-son covenant to the mother-child alliance, which unfortunately did not really lead to the resolution of conflicts in the family as equality between the genders. So my vision is people studying the cultures, studying how cultures evolve values from antagonism to cooperation, from passivity to activity, from alienation to considerable mutual respect. And that these are the science-based moral values, allowing us to possibly demystifies the religions by saying that morality is a science, it's the science of psychology, it's the science of resolving conflict. And we can rely on scientific explanation of what are the moral values rather than relying on divisive dogma. I think this is the end of my presentation, which is really promising a radical change in the field of psychology, evolving into a new psychology, which I call the moral science, because the unconscious really is driven by the need to resolve conflict. It is the need to transform energy from disturbing feelings to peace of mind. And this is the scientific analysis of this phenomenon that gives us dimensions to analyze both ourselves to heal the person and dimensions to heal the world. Thank you.